Hello, welcome to my channel. Today we are discussing chocolate. It is sweet, smooth and everywhere. It comes from
Theobroma cacao.
the seeds powers $1 billion global industry. What begins as a yellow fruit packed with slimy white pulp eventually becomes the treat we all know and love. But behind the sweetness lies a bitter truth: child labor, poverty and environmental damage. Much of the world's chocolate comes from West Africa, particularly Ivory Coast and Ghana. They together produce 60% of the world's cacao. Over 1.5 million children work under hazardous conditions to harvest the cacao beans that fuel a multi-billion-dollar industry. They are not carrying out chores, but doing hard work using dangerous tools and even being exposed to pesticides. What is more, they do this instead of going to school. Many of these children are victims of poverty, some are trafficked across borders, others are forced by circumstance or someone else. And the uncomfortable part, despite 2 decades of promises from the world's biggest chocolate companies, child labor is still widespread in the cocoa industry. Today nothing substantial has changed. But you, the consumer, have the power to change things. So who consumes cocoa? Each year the world goes through over 7 million metric tons of chocolate. Europe dominates the chocolate charts. Switzerland leads the way in per capita consumption. The average Swiss person eats around 10 kilograms of chocolate per year. That's more than 200 chocolate bars. Countries like Germany, Austria, Belgium aren't far behind because in Europe chocolate isn't a treat, it's a tradition. The history of chocolate goes way back. We have evidence that Mayans drank chocolate 600 BC for feasts, weddings, and religious ceremonies. It was used as medicine, offering to the gods, and even as currency. Their gods were often depicted holding cocoa pods. It was a spiritual experience for them. The Aztecs inherited the cocoa bean. It became one of their favorite drinks. While alcohol was a taboo for the elite, chocolate was celebrated, a luxury for nobles, warriors, and traders. In 1500, Spanish conquistadors brought cocoa back to Europe. At first, people were skeptical. The bitter, earthy taste didn't quite suit European palates, but once sugar and cinnamon were added, the cocoa transformed into something luxurious. A fashionable drink for the aristocracy. Royal courts across Spain, Italy, France began sipping chocolate with enthusiasm. For centuries it was the drink for the elites, only until 1828, a Dutch chemist
Koenraad van Houten.
developed a method to extract cocoa butter from roasted beans, leaving behind a fine powder. This made chocolate cheaper, more accessible, and easier to mix. By 1848, British Joseph Fry combined cocoa powder, sugar, and coconut butter to make the world's first solid chocolate bar. Quickly after, the chocolate became a global obsession. Cocoa today moves through one of the world's longest and most opaque agricultural supply chains. Unlike coffee or other commodities, cocoa undergoes a lot of transformations before reaching to customers. It is sketched out like this. It starts with planting and harvesting the raw cocoa beans. Next, the beans go through several processing stages to be transformed into cocoa paste, cocoa powder, cocoa butter, and eventually chocolate. Finally, the chocolate is crafted into a finished product and distributed. The preparation of cocoa beans for market is very labor intensive and has not changed significantly over the years for producers. After harvesting, the beans are fermented for 5 to 8 days to develop flavor, then sun-dried for up to 12 days to reduce moisture. Once dry, they are ready for sale and processing. The dried cocoa beans are roasted, the outer shells are cracked open, and the inner nibs are grounded into thick paste called chocolate liquor. This liquor is then heat tempered and mixed with other ingredients to make the chocolate. The processing stages are already taking place in the importing countries. The Netherlands, for example, is the biggest cocoa importer and has the largest grinding industry in the world. But there is one issue, that there is an unfair distribution of value and power in the chocolate industry. The production chain starts with millions of farmers producing cocoa and ends with billions of consumers enjoying chocolate. But what about everything in between? This part in the middle is dominated by a group of large chocolate companies that profit from keeping the purchase price of cocoa as low as possible. The result? Farmers are forced to live in poverty, which leads to child labor and forced labor. Farmers who grow cocoa earns 6 to 7 cents for every dollar spent on a chocolate bar. Most live well below the poverty line. At the same time big chocolate companies make billions in profit, the industry is dominated by major players, controlling the trade and processing. A 2020 study showed that over 70% of the value of chocolate bar is captured in the final two stages, processing and retail, not on the farms where it begins. Where is cocoa grown? Cocoa is grown in a narrow band around the equator between 20 degrees north and south. It needs warm temperatures, high humidity and rich soil, conditions found in countries across West Africa, South and Central America, and Southeast Asia. Globally, over 5 million small-scale farmers grow cocoa. Together, they produce more than 5 million tons of cocoa beans every year, but two countries dominate global cocoa production. I will pronounce it really wrong. Côte d'Ivoire
Côte d'Ivoire.
and Ghana. Côte d'Ivoire is the world's number one producer, accounting for around 40% of the world's cocoa. Just across the border, Ghana comes second with about 15% of the global output. Together, they supply more than half of the cocoa used to make chocolate around the world. Most of the cocoa in these countries is grown on small family farms, often just a few hectares in size. Farming is very tough and incomes are low, yet these farmers are the backbone of the global chocolate industry. To repeat the problem, millions of children, some as young as 5, are working in the cocoa farms instead of going to school or simply playing. They spend long, exhausting hours harvesting cocoa, often in dangerous conditions. Over 70% of the world comes from West Africa, where the problem is the most severe. But child labor is just one part of a bigger issue. Cocoa farmers are being exploited, many earn less than $1 a day. They cannot afford food, healthcare or school. Poverty traps entire families. Without fair pay, parents are forced to use their children to survive. This is the hidden cost of chocolate. It's time to change the story. But how exactly places like Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana are being exploited in the cocoa industry? The process of growing and harvesting cocoa is nearly identical in both countries. Each country has a government body that oversees cocoa production, the Council de Café Cacao or CCC in Côte d'Ivoire, and the Ghana Cocoa Board, better known as Cocoa Board in Ghana. These boards regulate the industry. They set what's called the farm gate price each year. That's the minimum legal price that buyers are allowed to pay farmers for their cocoa. Now, companies often say they must pay this farm gate price, but that's misleading. The farm gate is a floor, not a ceiling. They are allowed to pay more. Some even do, using premiums or certification schemes. But why don't these countries increase the farm gate price? Cocoa prices are largely set on the international commodity market. These prices are dominated by the multinational corporations such as Mars, Nestle, Barry, Callebaut or Cargill, who buy huge quantities of cocoa. In Côte d'Ivoire or Ghana, if they would raise the farm gate price too high, the buyers would either buy from somewhere else or try to manipulate future contracts, which they did in the past. And since these countries don't have a monopoly, they produce 60%, but it still might not be enough to fully dictate the terms. And cocoa is still the best way for farmers to earn money, and the government is simply not taking the risk. As of September 2022, farmers in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana were earning around 40% of a living income. To afford basic needs, food, school supplies, home repairs, medical care, they need the cocoa price to triple. The cocoa price is low not because the industry is poor, but because of who controls the money. So where the money is spent if the farmers are receiving so little? In 2023, Mars spent $7 million on a 30-second Super Bowl ad. In 2022, Ferrero spent $200 million on a new US factory. Meanwhile, Nestle spent over $19 billion on marketing and administration in 2022 and another $12 billion to buy back shares. The crazy thing is that it would only cost $700 million for Nestle to pay fair prices to the cocoa farmers they source from. It is less than 1% of their revenue. And across all companies, it would cost around $5 billion to pay every cocoa farmers in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana a living income. And that is less than 1.5% of their revenues in 2022 from Nestle, Mars, Ferrero and Cargill. A living income would mean more than survival, it means security. Farmers told the researchers if cocoa paid triple what it does now, about $3,600 per metric ton, in Cote d'Ivoire, they could finally save, invest in their farms, and thrive. The farmers are trying to supplement their income by harvesting and selling rubber or other commodities, but none pay as good as cocoa. In 2022, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire come together to take a bold step. They introduced the Living Income Differential, or LID, a $400 per metric ton increase in the price of cocoa. The goal was to ensure cocoa farmers received a higher farm gate price so that they could earn a living income. But companies found ways to avoid paying the LID. Some, like Hershey's, simply bought cocoa through the futures market where LID didn't apply. More often, the buyers just waited. They knew that Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire needed to sell off their cocoa stockpiles, and they could negotiate down the country's premium, a long-standing additional payment on top of the LID. And here is where the details matter. If companies are paying the LID but skip the country's premium, that they cancel out the increased price, and we go back to the beginning where the cocoa farmers are still not earning a living income. The West African cocoa sector has long been known to rely on child labor, including hazardous child labor and forced child labor. Why does this happen? Because the cocoa farmers are paid poverty level prices for their crops without a living income. Farmers cannot afford to hire adults, so they turn to their only help they have, their children. These children do dangerous work using machete to cut the cocoa pods, hauling heavy loads, and they are being exposed to toxic pesticides. According to a 2020 report by the US Department of Labor, 1.5 million children are currently working in the cocoa sector in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. For more than 20 years, chocolate companies have made their promises to end child labor, but instead of falling, child labor has risen from 31% since 2008 to 25% by 2019. And some forms of child labor are getting worse. More children are now being exposed to harmful chemicals that might even have lasting effects on their health. Even the low wages and the challenge of poverty is not enough. Farmers also have to struggle with three diseases. And now a new danger looms even larger: gold mining. Illegal mining is rapidly invading on cocoa farmland. In fact, 90% of Ghana's cocoa production happens in the same region where mining is most widespread: Ashanti, Eastern and Western Ghana. Both Ghana's boards and General Agricultural Workers Union call illegal gold mining the single biggest threat to cocoa farming in the country. Mining operations are causing extensive environmental damage. Rivers and streams are rerouted. Toxic chemicals like mercury pollute the water, leaving it muddy and unsafe for workers and their crops. Gold mining isn't just a threat for many desperate farmers, it's seen as an opportunity. They are struggling to survive on cocoa farming, and some allow their lands to be mined in exchange for short-term payout. But the damage is enormous, as once the gold is gone, the land is ruined, the soil is degraded, and the cocoa trees won't grow back. The short-term profits of illegal mining could destroy the future of cocoa and the livelihood of the people who depend on it. For far too long, cocoa farmers and their communities have suffered in silence, while multinational companies made billions of their labor. The cocoa industry is in crisis. Low prices, unpaid labor, hazardous child labor, trade diseases, and the growing threat of gold mining all threaten the future of cocoa farming in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. When farmers can't afford to pay workers, they turn to their children. When profits fall, education stops, and homes fall into despair. This is not the cost of doing business, this is exploitation. Despite all this, the cocoa farming communities are clear about what they need: a fair price for their cocoa. Chocolate is a multi-billion dollar industry and it's only growing, but farmers, the people who make it possible, remain trapped in poverty. The blame lies with the cocoa and the chocolate companies that set the prices they pay for cocoa. If companies are not changing their stance, you as a consumer also have the power to choose a company that is trying to pay a fair price for the cocoa. Let's see an example. Tony's Chocolonely. Tony's Chocolonely, a Dutch brand launched in 2005 by the TV producer Toon van der Koken. He was frustrated by the use of child slavery in the cocoa industry, so he created a chocolate bar. They introduced 5 sourcing principles, a set of rules designed to make chocolate fair and slave-free. They are a blueprint for what ethical chocolate should be. First, traceable cocoa beans. Most companies buy from a giant enormous pile, no one knows where the beans really come from and no one takes responsibility. But Tony says no more hiding. Every single bean in their bars is 100% traceable, from the farms in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana to the port to the factory all the way to your hands. Second, a higher price. Cocoa farmers often live in poverty, earning less than a living income. That poverty fuels child labor, so Tony says no more, and they pay more, a lot more. Fairtrade Premium Plus, an extra living income premium, bridging the gap between survival and sustainability. Third, strong farmers. Tony doesn't just buy cocoa, they build relationships with the farmer cooperatives, helping them become stronger and more independent. With better negotiating power, shared equipment, bulk fertilizers, and real training, these co-ops are fighting exploitation from the ground up. Fourth, the long term. Tony commits to at least 5 years with every partner. That stability means farmers can plan, invest, and build for the future, and with tools like the child labor monitoring and remediation system, they are finding and fighting child labor directly before it happens. And fifth, quality and productivity. Better farming makes better chocolate and more income for the people who grow it. Tony supports these farmers with tools, training, and fair pay, helping them double their yield, improve quality, and protect both people and land. So is it working? Yes, farmers are earning more, child labor is being monitored and reduced, and other chocolate brands are joining Tony's open chain, adopting the 5 principles too. But Tony isn't saying just look at us, they're saying this is how you do it, now it's your turn. No chocolate company should profit from slavery, from child labor, or from systematic poverty. So, every time you are buying a chocolate, you are making a choice. Your purchasing decision sends a message to companies, to suppliers, to the entire industry. You might think you are just one person, but together we are millions, and millions of small choices create massive change. Which company brands should you support and which one you should avoid? Researchers at the University of Wollongong in Australia tackled this exact question. They created a chocolate scorecard ranking companies based on how well they combat child labor and support ethical cocoa sourcing. Companies were placed into 4 categories and only 5 received a top good egg rating for exemplary ethical practices. Tony's Chocolonely, Original Beans, Beyond Good, Alter Echo, and Halba. These brands go above and beyond, investing in traceability, paying living income, and working directly with farmers. On the other hand, some companies still fall short. Here is the list based on their research. Mars. They include global favorites such as Snickers, Mars, Twix, Milky Way, Bounty, Three Musketeers, Maltesers, M&M's, Galaxy, Dove, Celebrations, Revels, Marathon, Tracker, Ballisto, and Nestle. Their key products are Kit Kat, Arao, Milky Bar, Smarties, Toffee Crisp, Yorkie, Soul Caps, Butterfinger, etc. Another brands to avoid is Hershey. The most iconic is Hershey Bar, Hershey's Kisses, Whoppers. Another brand is Ferrero. Their most famous are Nutella and the Kinder line. Another brand to avoid is Lindt, Caffarel, Küferle. Another brand to avoid is Palmer. And the list goes long and long. Before buying a chocolate bar, you can go to this website and explore if the company is indeed ethical or they are using child labor. If you are buying chocolate from these companies, you are supporting complex supply chains with some concerning labor and ethical histories. Every chocolate bar tells a story. When you choose ethically, you help write a better one for farmers, for children, and for the planet. Thanks for watching and for caring. Until next time.